Night of the 7th of April, 1947th year. State of Michigan, City of Dearborn. Outside the windows rages a spring storm, one of the strongest in the last decades. Rain lashes the windows, and the Rouge River, usually calm and obedient, has overflowed its banks, turning into an uncontrollable stream of mud and water. In the center of this natural chaos stands a massive stone structure reminiscent of a medieval Scottish castle. This is Fair Lane, the personal fortress of the man whose name every schoolchild on the planet knows. But inside this castle, something is happening that defies comprehension. In the master bedroom, covered with heavy woolen blankets, lies an old man. He is 83 years old. His fortune is estimated in hundreds of millions of dollars, and the influence of his company spans all continents. But look closely at the room. It is dark here. The electric lamps are dead. The heating radiators are icy. In the house belonging to the king of the industrial era, there is no electricity. The man who electrified the modern world, who put humanity on wheels and made technology accessible to every farmer, is dying by the flickering light of kerosene lamps and simple wax candles. How could this have happened? Why did one of the richest people in history find himself in his final hour in conditions reminiscent of a 19th century peasant's life? This paradox is no accident. It is the final chords of a grand and dramatic symphony that was Henry Ford's life. The scene of his death perfectly rhymes with the philosophy of his life, full of contradictions, genius, and a strange, almost manic drive for independence. To understand why the lights went out that night, we need to forget the glossy image of the successful businessman in a black suit. We need to rewind time and enter this house not as tourists, but as explorers of the human soul. Fair Lane is not just an estate. It is not just 56 rooms and 31,000 square feet of space. It is the architectural imprint of Henry Ford's mind. Stone and mortar here tell a story that economics textbooks are silent about. Many of his contemporaries, the Vanderbilts, Rockefellers, Astors, built palaces to shout about their wealth. They erected copies of French chateaux and Italian palazzos on Fifth Avenue or in Newport so that society would accept them. But Henry Ford took a different path. When he conceived his house, he was already rich, but he hated the idleness of the elite. He despised Detroit's high society soirees. He did not want to live in the fashionable Grosse Pointe district, where old money and automobile business nouveau riche settled. He chose seclusion. He chose the land of his ancestors. And he decided to build not a palace for receptions, but an impregnable fortress for his family. Nobody suspected that behind the modest facade hid the most complex engineering machine. Ford wanted a house that depended on no one, neither on city authorities, nor on coal suppliers, nor on the whims of the economy. He dreamed of absolute autonomy. It was precisely this dream of total control that led him to create a unique hydroelectric power station right on the estate grounds, connected to the house by an underground tunnel 300 feet long. He believed that technology would save him from the chaos of the outside world. But on that fateful night of April of the 47th year, nature struck back. The Rouge River, whose energy he had so proudly harnessed, flooded his power station. Water flooded the generators. The technocratic utopia collapsed exactly at the moment when its creator was breathing his last. This is not a story about architecture. This is a story about a man who tried to build his own world by his own rules, about a man who was simultaneously a visionary, a tyrant, a simple mechanic, and a complex philosopher. Fair Lane holds the secrets of his fears and his love. The walls of this house have seen not only the triumph of creating the assembly line, but also deep personal tragedy of loss, conflicts with his only son, and the quiet but indomitable strength of the woman who was by his side. To unravel the mystery of the death by candlelight, we must understand how and why this stone fortress was built. And it all begins far from the architect's blueprints. It all begins with the character of the man who always knew that he was different from others. It seemed impossible that the son of a simple farmer would become the one who would change the landscape of the planet, but it is precisely in his origins that lies the key to understanding Fairlane. Henry Ford was born on the 30th of July, 1863 year, when the Civil War was still raging in America. The world into which he came was a world of dirt, horse manure, and exhausting physical labor. His father William's farm in Springwells Township was not poor, but it required total devotion from dawn to dusk. It was here, among the endless fields, that the main inner conflict of the future magnate was born. Henry hated farm labor. He saw in it not pastoral romance, but monstrous inefficiency. The biggest waste in the world is the waste of human effort, he would say later. His mind worked differently. Where others saw the inevitable heaviness of existence, he saw an engineering mistake that demanded correction. In 1888th year, an event occurs that determines his fate. He marries Clara Bryant. This was a union not just of two people, but of two worlds. Clara, a girl from the neighboring farm, became the only person who unconditionally believed in the strange mechanic. She was his believer. When Henry decided to leave the reliable land of his ancestors for the noisy, smoky Detroit, it was a real rebellion. He went against his father's will, against age-old traditions. In 1891st year, he gets a job as an engineer at Thomas Edison's company, beginning his ascent. However, the Detroit elite of that time, railroad owners, bankers, lumber industrialists, never accepted Ford as one of their own. For the inhabitants of luxurious drawing rooms, he remained an upstart, an uneducated technician with oil stains on his cuffs. This social alienation formed his tough armor. He did not seek invitations to their closed clubs. He decided to create a world where he himself would dictate the rules. His philosophy crystallized. Functionality is more important than form, utility is more important than etiquette. But the paradox of Ford's personality was that, being a prophet of progress, he remained a deeply sentimental man. When the time came to build his family nest, he made an unexpected move. He did not choose the prestigious Grosse Pointe district, where all of Detroit's rich lived. He returned to where he had fled, from the banks of the Rouge River, just a few miles from his parental farm. Fairlane was to become not just a house, but proof that he had returned to this land not as its slave, but as its full-fledged master. He intended to build a monument to his triumph, but for that, he needed to combine his ambitions with Clara's desires, and this led to the first serious conflict in the history of the estate's creation. By 1913th year, Henry Ford was no longer just a successful entrepreneur. He was an icon. The assembly line is launched, the Model T floods America's roads, money flows like a river that seems impossible to stop. It is precisely at this moment of absolute triumph that the construction of Fairlane begins. But what was supposed to become the construction project of the century instantly turned into a battlefield between two philosophies. And here Clara Ford steps onto the stage, carrying out her quiet but decisive revolution. The initial plan was radical. Ford, always striving for innovations, turned to architects of the Chicago School, students of the great Frank Lloyd Wright, Herman von Holst, and Marion Mahoney Griffin. They proposed a project in the prairie style, a low, sprawling house spread across the ground, with vast plains and sharp angles. This was the architecture of the future, bold, democratic, devoid of decorations. This perfectly resonated with Henry's engineering mind. For him, the house was a machine for living, but this cold modernism encountered Clara's categorical resistance. "I want a home, not a museum," she declared. Clara, the keeper of the hearth, saw in these blueprints a lack of soul. She did not need avant-garde experiments. She needed reliability, coziness, and a connection to history. At that moment, Henry, who could fire any director at his factory, bowed his head. He understood. Without Clara, this house would have no meaning. The turning point came during their trip to Europe. Driving through English estates and Scottish highlands, the Fords saw what they were looking for. Old stone manors, covered in ivy, standing for centuries. This was the architecture of eternity, not of the moment. Returning to America, they take an unprecedented step. They fire the fashionable modernist architects right in the middle of the design process. In their place comes William Van Tyne, an architect from Pittsburgh, who is given a paradoxical task: to take the already laid foundation and frame of the prairie style, but to clothe it in the garments of an English baronial castle. What resulted in the end, architects to this day call a stylistic oxymoron, but for the Fords, it became the perfect fusion of their worlds. Fair Lane began to rise above the Rouge River as a hybrid. From the outside, this is a stern fortress, clad in marble-like limestone, Marblehead limestone, with massive walls capable of withstanding a siege. This stone symbolized protection from the outside world, from intrusive reporters and the envious eyes of Detroit's elite. But inside, this fortress hid the most advanced technologies of its time. This was a marriage of tradition and progress. Clara got her gardens, her cozy rooms with fireplaces, where one could hide from the storms of the 20th century. Henry got his engineering dream. The house was fully autonomous. While other tycoons depended on city services, Fair Lane produced its own ice, purified its own water, generated its own heat. Even here, in the choice of materials and systems, Ford's obsession with independence manifested itself. The union of Henry and Clara was cemented in stone. This house became a statement. They do not belong to the old money with their snobbery, nor do they accept mindless modernism. They created their own class, their own category. And when in 1915th year they finally moved into this castle of 31,000 square feet, it looked like the finale of a fairy tale. But as often happens with people of such scale, the grandeur of the walls only amplified the echo of the inner emptiness that began to fill these vast halls. The most interesting and frightening was hidden not in the facade, but in the details of the interior, which we will now begin to explore. To enter Fair Lane is to embark on a journey through the labyrinths of Henry Ford's consciousness. 56 rooms scattered over 31,000 square feet do not just demonstrate wealth. They scream about the duality of his nature. Crossing the threshold, you enter not a home, but a carefully staged set. The walls of the main hall, paneled with dark oak, oppress with their grandeur. But as soon as you go further, you feel a strange dissonance. The music room is a temple of traditions. There is no place here for the frivolous jazz of the roaring 20s. The central place is occupied by the giant Skinner organ, whose pipes are hidden behind walnut grills. When Clara played it, the sound filled the entire first floor, making the crystal in the chandeliers vibrate. This was the sound of order and harmony to which Henry aspired so much in the chaos of industrialization. But the true psychological portrait of the master is hidden in the so-called field room. This is the most paradoxical room in the history of American architecture. Imagine, you are inside a stone castle costing nearly $2 million of those years. You open a heavy door and find yourself in a rustic cabin. Rough cypress walls, a huge fireplace made of unhewn stone, simple wooden benches. It smells of resin and smoke here. It was here, and not in the formal dining room, that Ford received his only true friends, Thomas Edison and Harvey Firestone. The marble-lined pool with heated benches, an unheard-of luxury for the 15th year, adjoins Henry's own ascetic bedroom. While guests admired the stucco and silks, the empire's master slept in a room reminiscent of a monk's cell. He built a palace to prove his status to the world, but inside this palace created a refuge to hide from that very world. Every detail here, from the bronze handles to the radiators hidden in the walls, whispers one thing: total control. But even the 2-foot-thick walls could not protect him from the tragedy that was already at the doorstep, ready to destroy this illusion of security from within. But the most terrible secret of Fairlane was hidden not in the underground tunnels and not behind the marble walls. It played out in the dining room, at the long dining table, where an oppressive silence reigned. This house, built as a fortress for the family, became the stage for one of the cruelest dramas in the history of American business, the destruction of his own son. Henry and Clara had only one child, Edsel, the prince of the Ford Empire. But Edsel was everything his father was not. Refined, art lover, patron, he despised brute force and adored modern design. He married a girl from the Clay family, that very Grosse Pointe elite that Henry hated with all his soul. For the old Ford, this was a betrayal. He saw in his son a softness that needed to be burned out with a hot iron. And Fairlane became the headquarters of this psychological war. Here enters perhaps the darkest figure in the automobile king's circle, Harry Bennett. Former boxer, head of Ford's security service, a man without morals or principles. Henry brought him close, making him his watchdog. Bennett became the son Henry wanted to see. Tough, ruthless, ready to rip out throats. The old Ford used Bennett as a torture instrument for Edsel, undermining his own son's authority at every step, cancelling his orders, and publicly humiliating him. The walls of Fairlane remember not the laughter of grandchildren, but Clara's quiet tears as she found herself caught between two fires. She adored her son, but dared not contradict her genius husband. Henry sincerely believed that with cruelty he was tempering Edsel, preparing him to lead the empire. But instead of steel, he got shards. Constant stress and humiliations ate away at Edsel from the inside, in the literal sense. He developed a severe form of stomach cancer, aggravated by a stress-induced ulcer. The tragedy reached its peak in the spring of 1943 year. Edsel was dying. He suffered from monstrous pains. But Henry Ford, barricaded in Fairlane, refused to believe the doctors. In his stubbornness, he forbade his son's surgery, insisting that he just needed to stop being nervous and drink raw milk from the farm. The great mechanic thought that the human body could be repaired just like an engine, by changing the fuel. On the 26th of May, 1943 year, the telephone in Fairlane rang. Edsel Ford passed away at the age of 49. At that moment, the grandeur of the marble fortress collapsed. All the millions, all the autonomy, all the power of the power station could not bring back the only heir. Henry Ford, the man who could buy anything in the world, stood in the middle of his office utterly penniless. The death of his son broke him. Witnesses said that after the funeral, the ghost of old age instantly overtook the iron magnate. He began to wander at night through the corridors of Fairlane, talking to Edsel's shadow, asking for advice that no one else could give. The house, conceived as a symbol of the dynasty, turned into a mausoleum. But fate had one more blow in store. With Edsel's departure, the empire was under threat of seizure by that very watchdog Harry Bennett. And it was here, in Fairlane, amid grief and mourning, that the final battle for the legacy was to take place, one that required the intervention of the women of the Ford clan. The crisis that engulfed Fairlane after Edsel's funeral was not financial. It was a crisis of the empire's very existence. 80-year-old Henry Ford, whose mind was already wandering in the fog of dementia, tried to take the helm into his own hands again. But instead of strategy, he brought chaos. Behind his back stood Harry Bennett, who had effectively usurped power. preparing to tear the company apart. It seemed that the great legacy, built on the assembly line and steel, would collapse under the weight of senile stubbornness and gangster ambitions. And it was precisely at this moment, when collapse seemed inevitable, that an incredible transformation occurred in the cold corridors of Fair Lane. Salvation came not from engineers or lawyers. It came from the women whom Henry had always considered mere keepers of the hearth. Edsall's widow, Eleanor Clay Ford, and Clara herself, the believer, forged an unprecedented alliance. This was a scene worthy of Shakespeare's pen. Eleanor came to her father-in-law with an ultimatum that took the old tyrant's breath away. She declared, "If you do not hand over the presidency to my son, Henry Ford II, I will sell my shares on the open market." This would mean the end of family control, the end of everything Henry had lived for. He tried to object, but then came the second shot. Clara, his faithful companion of 55 years, quietly added, "If you do not do this, Henry, I will leave you." This was checkmate. The man who fought with the US government, unions, and Wall Street banks capitulated before his own wife. For the first time in his life, he admitted defeat. Power passed to his grandson, Henry Ford II, who immediately fired Bennett and began to save the company. And old Henry retreated into the shadow of Fair Lane. The last 2 years of his life became a slow fading. He spent more and more time in his favorite field room, sitting by the fireplace, gazing at the fire. He, who had changed the world, was now just an observer. He asked drivers to take him to the old farm, to the places of his childhood, as if trying to close the circle. And so came the 7th of April, 1947th year, the final act of the drama, which nature staged with frightening irony. The Rouge River, that very river whose energy Ford had harnessed for his independence, rose up. The strongest flood began. Water broke through the dam, flooded the tunnels, and inundated the generators of Fair Lane's power station. At 11 o'clock in the evening, the lights in the estate went out. All life support systems stopped. Telephones went silent. Heating turned off. The great technocrat found himself in complete darkness and cold, cut off from the world he himself had created. In this silence, broken only by the sound of rain and the crackling of logs in the fireplace, Henry Ford took his last breath. He died not as an industrial magnate surrounded by machines, but as a simple man by candlelight in Clara's arms, returning to that very simplicity from which he had fled all his life. The circle closed. Nature defeated the machine. After that fateful night when the lights went out, Fair Lane began to slowly fall into slumber. Clara Ford, the faithful guardian, outlived her husband by only 3 years. In 1950th year, she passed away, and the huge house, deprived of its masters, was finally orphaned. For decades it became the property of the company, then the university, turning into offices and archives. It seemed that the spirit of Henry and Clara had dissipated, dissolved in bureaucratic bustle. But the walls remember everything. Today, Fair Lane is experiencing its second birth. The estate was bought by a new independent organization led by Ford descendants, who have begun a large-scale restoration. They are removing layers of paint, uncovering flaws, restoring those very gardens of Clara. But why? Why are we so obsessed with preserving this strange hybrid of fortress and prairies? Because the story of Fair Lane is not just the biography of a rich man. It is the eternal mirror reflection of our own thirst for control. Henry Ford was the archetype of the modern man. He believed that technology would solve all problems. He believed that if you build high enough walls and powerful enough generators, you can wall yourself off from chaos, pain, and death. He spent millions to become independent from the world, but in the end, the world found him through the river's water and through his son's illness. This house stands today as a monumental reminder. Autonomy is an illusion. We can surround ourselves with comfort, smart systems, and financial safety cushions. But in the end, we are all equal before the face of the elements and loss. Fairlane teaches us that an empire built at the cost of relationships with loved ones turns into a golden cage. Edsel's tragedy echoes louder in these corridors than the roar of the power station's turbines. Henry Ford left us a world on wheels, but his personal finale, Death by Candlelight in a Powerless Castle, leaves us a philosophical lesson. True legacy is not stones, not factories, and not billions in accounts. Legacy is what we invest in the people who remain after us. Iron rusts, stone crumbles, but love and forgiveness are the only things impervious to time. When you look at photographs of Fairlane, do not envy its scale. Peer into the dark windows. There, in the depths, lies the truth. The greatest industrialist of the 20th century, the man who could buy the entire world, in his final hour needed only the warmth of his wife's hand and the faint glow of a simple wax candle. And perhaps it is in this flickering flame that lies the only true success worth striving for.